Well, thanks everybody. Good evening and welcome to the Amy Van Andel Library for the third and final presentation in a series called Communities by Design, presented in collaboration with the Kent District Library. I'm Michael Van Dennen. I'm the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan. On behalf of my colleagues Erica Kubik and Rachel Brooks, and the Board of Directors of the World Affairs Council, thank you for coming. The Council's mission is to empower the people and organizations of West Michigan to engage thoughtfully with the world. We do that with the help of many partners, including our good friends at KDL. Change the world, we believe you first have to know the world, and you can learn more about what we do at worldmichigan.org. Again, tonight we say a special thank you to our friends at KDL to provide this free informational resource. And I'd like Randy Goebel to come up and give us some words from KDL. Randy?
Thank you, and welcome to the newest branch of Kent District Library here in Ada. We're approaching the second birthday of this branch. It's brand new. There's a lot new going on here in Ada, which makes it kind of a great location for the subject of what we're talking about tonight in this series. But I also wanted to give you a little shameless plug. If you see a copy of Kaleidoscope outside of the door, pick that up. There's a lot that's always going on at the library, and one of the things that we do every year is the Write Michigan Short Story Competition. And it started just as a simple little short story competition, but it's expanded to include teen poetry, writers' workshops, music writers' workshops, all sorts of ways for people to find ways to express themselves and explore ideas. And that's a perfect fit with what we're doing here tonight with Communities by Design in partnership with the World Affairs Council of West Michigan. For several years, we've co-hosted conversations on issues that are important to us as individuals and as organizations, and we're all focused on the greater good of the community. Kent District Library exists to further all people. Equity and access are at the core of what the library is about, as it is for all of us, really. And with so much development going around, including restoration of the Rapids downtown, what you see here in Ada, we just had a major renovation in Granville. There's works in development for Rockford. All around us, there's a lot going on. So we're really excited to ask the question, what is the role of civic design in creating more equitable, just, and sustainable communities that we're proud to call home? And with that, welcome to tonight's conversation with Communities by Design.
Thanks, Randy. Well, we're very pleased that Ken Yocom came all the way from the University of Washington to be with us. I've had a delightful time with him today. We drove out to the city of Muskegon to talk with planners out there. They're obviously very interested, concerned with their waterfront. We had a great conversation, and we got to show Ken Lake Michigan. So he saw it, and he and I declined to be part of the surfers, the windsurfers that were out on the lake today. It looked a little too cold. Ken is a department chair and associate professor of landscape architecture at the University of Washington. He primarily teaches seminar and studio courses in theory, in ecology, and in urban design. He's trained as an ecologist and landscape architect with professional experience in the environmental consulting and construction industries. He's a graduate of the University of Washington's Masters of Landscape Architecture program and the PhD program from the program of Built Environments. He researched nature and society relations through the contemporary context of urban ecological restoration practices. Ken investigates how water in all of its forms shapes the past to future functions and patterns of our built environments. He has written extensively on the themes developed from his work. There are 2 books, Ecological Design and NOW Urbanism, The Future City is Here. He also regularly contributes to professional practice and scholarly publications on issues of global biodiversity, urban environmental governance, ecological design, and contemporary nature and society relations in the urban context. Ken has a strong belief that collaboratively the allied design professions can act as catalysts in recognizing, utilizing, and transforming the inherent potential of our built environments into places that are socially equitable, environmentally just, and economically sustainable. After his presentation this evening, there'll be plenty of time for questions, and you know the House rules to be respectful and succinct. And his presentation tonight is At the Water's Edge, Reconnecting Cities to Their Waterfronts. Let's welcome Ken Yocom to West Michigan.
Thank you all, and good evening, everyone. I appreciate you taking the time to join us. I'd like to begin by thanking the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan, specifically Erica and Michael and Rachel, for getting me out here, but I'd also like to recognize and appreciate it being part of this series. And so I hope the discussion tonight and the conversation tonight contributes to the larger dialogue headed out by Dr. Nordnum and Sister Anne Marie. Damien Marie, thank you. Again, my name is Ken Yocom, and the introduction went through, so I appreciate that. One of the pieces I did want to bring up is that a lot of the work that I do and the engagements that I do are almost all collaborative. They're all negotiated, and they're all worked out. I don't work in a silo. I don't work on my own. The ideas that we bring forward are brought together in different ways. I work with a great research team from across multiple universities, across multiple continents, and we engage in different issues around waterfronts and understanding waterfront collaborations. I was telling Michael earlier today, as I was on the plane heading to Western Michigan, I had a colleague on the plane headed to Singapore for different conversations around their waterfronts and their development practices as well. But what you see on this list is a short list of colleagues and collaborators that I work with, but also some of the books and articles that have been really foundational for me in understanding waterfronts and building my knowledge. Again, as you mentioned, my background's actually in wildlife ecology, and I had a whole career in wildlife ecology and ecological restoration, and shifted over into the allied design and planning fields because of an interest to be applied with my work. We did great work. I did great work as a wildlife ecologist of generating knowledge and getting it on the shelf so that others could build on that and use that, and I really appreciated that work. But for myself, I wanted to be more active with the work and really wanted to see change happen over the course of time. And so now I find myself straddling those two worlds quite a bit. Really enjoy and appreciate the opportunities to do that. As we begin, and before I get into this slide, I'd like to offer acknowledgement to the tribes and bands of the Anishinaabe people, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, upon whose ancestral lands we have the privilege of joining together for this conversation. I'd also like to recognize the Coast Salish indigenous peoples of what is today known as the Puget Lowlands, in which the city of Seattle resides, the location that I have the privilege of living and working and raising my family. I acknowledge, recognize, and appreciate these communities, past, present, and future, and a shared approach for continually advancing understanding of what it means to live in sovereignty with land and water. I find those in our region, in the University of Washington, we begin all presentations with an acknowledgement of land and an acknowledgement of peoples. And I find it to be a really critical and important moment to stop and consider and understand that the moments that we are in today, and as we begin to think about the future, have long histories, and these places have long histories. And how do we begin to understand more about those histories, not in a way so that we can take control of those histories, but in ways that which we can broaden our own perspectives and build better futures and more inclusive futures. So thank you for that. One of the reasons why I brought this slide up, and this is Porte Bordeaux in France, 1927, is it's one of the quintessential images of my childhood thinking about waterfronts. I always thought of waterfronts as energetic places, places of exchange of people and goods and ideas and thoughts and dynamics. And there was also something, there was a little bit of an undercurrent to it. There was something kind of sketchy. There was a little dark, something nefarious that was part of that. And that was part of what generated my interest to really start working and thinking about waterfronts. And other people that I've talked to that work in the same area have the same thing. And whether their ideas were their ideas and the perceptions of waterfronts were created through experience or through media. Mine were created through media, mostly through movies and understanding these points of exchange. As we've dug deeper, what we've really begun to realize is that these places they're just never static. They're always evolving, they're always in transition, responding to politics and market economics, connecting the water to the city and the city to the region. And this is also where there's more insidious and unseen aspects of these locations that strongly correspond with social exclusion, labor malpractice, and environmental degradation. And so those earlier images that I had of the city and of the waterfront were accurate, but they just weren't very deep. And so the more that we get into exploring waterfronts and understanding waterfronts, the more that we really begin to understand what are some of the issues and what are some of the characters at place. You know, some have argued that the origin of the city begins at the waterfront. And arguably that may be true. Waterfronts are these points of exchange, these points of intersection. The waterfronts where people traveled down rivers and collected in different areas for exchange. Slowly cities grew in those areas. And so while that may be the case, you know, what we've seen over the past 100 years, over the past century, is really an intense technological and economic modernization of waterfronts and cities in general. That have, you know, turned these once productive spaces, leaving behind large swaths of derelict and degrading land, manufacturing plants, shipping terminals, warehouses, and residential and commercial communities. Much like the abandoned Market Street power plant here in New Orleans, it's a site that's really shrouded in history, contamination, and exclusion, but one that's got great futures. It's the focus of an upcoming design search and design collaboration that I'm not a part of, but there's a great team of people really starting to think about this Market Street power plant as the location for kind of beginning to redefine the waterfront of New Orleans. And while there are these areas of degradation and kind of derelict areas, there's also a tremendous movement for port and waterfront cities worldwide, with more of a post-industrial understanding of their locations, and they began regenerating and revitalizing their waterfronts, taking these often dilapidated areas and seeking ways to promote growth in a more contemporary frame. And through part of this, urban policymakers, planners, and developers really recognize the potential of focusing massive investments into these waterfronts to increase tax revenue and promote job creation and advance local tourism opportunities while providing, while kind of building greater continuity within the existing urban and social structures of their city. One great example that's not far from me is Southeast False Creek Waterfront in Vancouver, British Columbia. It's a waterfront that has almost completely transformed. It's got its ups and it's got its downs. It's got its pros and it's got its cons. And what we'll find out throughout all of the cases that we look at today is that they all have ups and downs. There's no perfect project out there. If a project is moved forward and it's very well highlighted, there's always issues, there's always people, and there's always community pieces that don't quite fit within the fold of these things. And so it's part of change, and yes, change is hard, but really thinking through these projects in ways that we can be equitable and distribute kind of goods, services, and ideas that focus on the long term. And that's really what we're going to be talking about, today. Just returning to Seattle, Seattle is such a kind of important place to me. Obviously, it's I've lived there for the past 25 years. It's a place that I teach about land, and I study water, and I bring these all together to explore kind of changes in the city. We used to, in my department, talk about how we use the city of Seattle as our laboratory. We no longer use that term just because it's not necessarily true, and it's not necessary for us to frame it as tests on community, but really working with communities. and we've changed our approaches, and we've changed our understanding. But one of the reasons why I wanted to show you these 4 images, that over the course of essentially 90 years, there's really been some massive change along Seattle's waterfront. Seattle's a really young city. 1856 is really when it started, but the city didn't really begin to grow until the 1880s. In 1898 is that image in the upper left, and yes, it's hard to see, but what you can see in the foreground that you all are probably fairly familiar with seeing in historical pictures are the logs on the water. It's great logging, tremendous logging community. That was the focus. What you can see is the few straggling trees off in the skyline distance. I find is funny, which is in the sense, it's both funny and sad of that's what was left of a once really robust and full forest. But by 1934, already on the waterfront, they're trying to understand these changes, and they're trying to make the waterfront work for them so that they can have a more robust economy. They can accommodate the technological changes in shipping industry that are occurring at the time. And they started to build this seawall, and they started to build this elevated freeway. One of the reasons why I showed this image is you can see the underside structure of how they were building out over that. It's essentially log piles driven into the shoreline and supporting this area. This becomes really critical later on in the conversation that we're going to have. And by 1952, you can see what they've done is they've actually, on top of these log piles, built a giant freeway. It's a double-decker freeway. Highway 99, it gave the best views of the city, quite honestly. And it has created a lot of trouble within our city in recent decades. But part of it then I wanted to show is by 1980 is a much larger scale. There's a lot going on within the city. These areas that we're seeing here in all of these images is just one small section in the far distance of this picture. But the port city, the waterfront areas of Seattle are really widespread. And I think it's important to think about when we think about waterfront development and waterfront regeneration to really step back and to explore and the picture's a little granulated, and I apologize for that. I think I blew it up a little bit too big, just so that you could see it better. But this is a complex city. Waterfront redevelopment, waterfront regeneration is a really complex process. And when I say it's a complex city, yes, it's productive. Yes, there's a lot of things going on. But in the interstitial spaces, in the interstitial processes of all of this, there are areas that are underserved. There are areas that have become derelict. There are areas that have fallen apart. And beginning to explore these areas and understand these areas better, we can begin to think about how we can stitch back the fabric of our waterfronts and build stronger places. I'm getting ahead of my notes. Within these interstitial places, we can begin to find some real jewels. This is the Seattle Sculpture Park in Seattle. It's at the, I don't have a pointer, but you can see the Space Needle way off in the distance up there, and it's at the base, kind of the base of the Space Needle, touching the city to the water. It was once a gas refinery and distributor. As you can see, kind of on the image on the left, the infrastructure of the gas refinery and distributor had been removed, but it sat as a derelict site for some 30 years on the site. And then Seattle Art Museum and a large benefactor as part of Seattle Art Museum had this idea of creating a sculpture park within the city and for the city of Seattle. And one of the key elements of the sculpture park when they had selected upon the site was to identify ways to bridge people from the upper city all the way down to the waterfront. One of the key mottos was you can put your toes in the water of the waterfront. And so this project isn't wholly constructed, right? It's in some ways much more expensive than the building and how they had to construct it. And part of the reason why is it's elevated in so many places. It has these zigzags that cross that allow a visitor to come from the upper part of the city and work their way down back and forth. But it also incorporates a rail line to be able to run through it. Multiple roadways also run through and around it, and the park bridges over the top of it. And so a super complex project that had many problems along the way that took a really long time to negotiate and to figure out, but is one small example, in my mind, of a regeneration project that was really quite effective and really kind of promising to be able to make those moves. I think one of the key things in that project helps me to see it as well is that to do waterfront regeneration projects and development projects, you really need to think a little bit outside the box from what we do in contemporary development and contemporary work. You just need to seek different perspectives. Once again, I'm just going to iterate this over and over again. These projects are complex. They're really difficult to navigate and to understand. And so part of that is shifting the perspective. This is a Dymaxion map of the world. And I just wanted to, at first I had a Mercator map, was the map that we typically see, but this is the Dymaxion map of the world. And one of the reasons why I wanted to show this map to you is because it's forcing you to shift perspectives, forcing you to see the world in a different way. And I argue that to do waterfront regeneration practices effectively, you need to be able to shift and explore the projects and explore the opportunities and explore the dynamics of engagement in very different ways. You can see the red dots, but there's one question I want to ask you is do you see a pattern within the red dots, or what stands out to you as part of this? Yeah.
They're mainly in North America. They're in North America.
Exactly. They're mainly that's great. They're mainly in the global north. And the reasons for this are once you learn about them, are quite obvious. Is the collection of wealth, particularly urban wealth, resides in the global north. And while there are some examples of projects that are occurring in the southern hemisphere, they're not as extensive. They're not as far along by any means. And so I did want to bring that forward and help you to recognize that the majority of the projects that I'm going to be talking about tonight are in the global north, and they are in very wealthy cities, very wealthy countries, and supported by not only public but also private partnerships. And I think that's a key element to consider, and as part of what one of the issues and concerns that the research group that I work with is beginning to investigate as we dive a little deeper into our own work. The other piece I wanted to bring up on this slide is the term regeneration. You'll often see the terms redevelopment used or revitalization used around urban waterfronts. And while those terms are valid and used all the time, the group that I work with uses regeneration very intentionally and very explicitly, in the sense, both internally and publicly, in the sense that we view regeneration as a more holistic approach. Instead of developing a project to solve solutions, we look for opportunities and potential, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. In trying to understand how can we develop actions or think about different engagements that serve multiple needs. Instead of straight up trying to solve a problem, how do we begin to engage the issue in a different way so that we can be more effective in responding to it in the short and the near term? A lot of these ideas that I'm presenting right now are going to be ideas that we explore a little bit deeper as we move forward. But I think the key thing for us is really in the first stages of understanding kind of what are some of the potentials and challenges of the urban waterfront regeneration projects. This is actually a slide that I borrowed from a class that I've taught recently. But placing potential on the sides, very explicitly using potential instead of solutions in this sense, and then the challenges on the other side for completing this work. As we can go through, we can look at a little bit of this. We'll talk about the Chicago Riverwalk projects, kind of the phases 2 and 3 that were recently completed and have been really well recognized. But as you can see, as you go down kind of the potential about improved urban districts, increasing public accessibility, open space, and access to all is a theme that we see almost in all vision plans for urban regeneration projects. Of course, improved environmental quality. with the potential to enhance urban features and increase tourism and tax potential revenue, essentially is what it is. And on the far side, you begin to see some of those challenges that are concerns about why would we do some of this work. These are also, this is also a slide that I bring to many presentations with public officials so that we can begin to talk about the why. The why is a hard question for many public officials to get around when they're first starting to think about urban waterfront regeneration, because not necessarily understanding the potential holds them back. And then once they do begin to understand potentials and can start to see the potentials within the context of their cities, they have a greater opportunity to think about ways in which to transform it. But then we also pair it with the challenges, because these are the pitfalls that we often see within the work that we do. And so Chicago River Walk, I put this project in here explicitly for you all, as it's not too far away, and then we'll reach further abroad from there. But this is really phases 1 through 2. The Riverwalk redevelopment project within Chicago was really a focus on how do we connect our city, and in particular the people of the city, to the Chicago River. How do we bring people to the Chicago River? Other aspects of this are really trying to focus on how do they, what were some different opportunities to engage multiple modes of mobility. And so people could go through the city in different ways and at different levels. With the car in the street level, it was one kind of chaotic situation. But if you thought about a slight elevation change, you could separate and remove people from the streets, basically, and some great opportunities. And so part of what the potentials of this were is you can see all 5 of these potentials within this project. And it's been touted as a very successful project, which in many ways I agree, and we'll talk about some of the other ways too. You know, it increased a lot of public accessibility in open space. These 3 images are from Sasaki, who is on the which is a designer on the design team, and you can begin to see the steps from upper left is what it was, through construction, into a different part of what it is today. But I think you can agree that there's a lot more accessibility. There's not more ability for the people of Chicago to get to the waterfront. One of the pieces I really love as a wildlife ecologist is these projects that they developed as part of ways to improve the environmental quality, but also ways to soften up the infrastructure and soften it up and create points of interesting engagement. And so what you see between these piers coming out is a set of floating wetlands. I have other projects and work in a lab that studies floating wetlands, so it's part of what interests me. And what I like about it is they have these really interesting drawings that help to show you kind of how these floating wetlands work and what they cover up, and how each of the piers that are used as part of the understructure, or how each of the columns that support the individual piers also builds in these habitat structures. One of the things, however, what they're finding is that it's really difficult to manage and maintain underwater habitat structures. And so a lot of things are falling apart, are degrading much more rapidly than they thought they were. And what these projects were intended to do was initiate the processes so that kind of natural processes would begin to take over. And that the system itself would begin to support itself. It doesn't look like there's going to be quite enough time for that to happen, and so they're looking at different ways in which they can manage these issues in these conditions. But another really important in any waterfront regeneration project is revenue, and understanding what are the overall costs going to be. And so for phases 2 and 3, the construction costs were around $100 million. That doesn't include planning costs and design costs necessarily either. But what they're looking at is over the long term. So by the time phase 3 opened, they were looking at $8.6 million a year in revenue. They would either continue to increase or stay the same over the course of time, and very quickly understanding that this is a long-term investment. To get their investment back, they need to have patience, and they need to work towards it, which means they need to implement they really need to implement plans to maintain it. And that's a really key element as part of these projects is that we find is if an organization or if a city or if an entity is looking to develop their work, that upfront investment is really important because and the payout needs to come over the long term because then they have an vested interest in keeping it maintained and moving it forward. And that's one of the pieces that we look at quite a bit as well. So when we look at these kind of components, the potentials and the challenges, we've come up with these kind of really 4 critical planning processes. And these are planning processes that aren't unique to waterfronts. They might be named different things at different times, but we bring forward values and visions as number 1, collective impact. And collective impact and values and visions are we package together oftentimes, but they're separate things, and we'll talk about cases for each of these. And then planning horizons and adaptive success. These are other components of what you really kind of foundational and necessary in our minds for understanding success in waterfront regeneration projects. And so when we begin to look at these together, you know, values and visions is really this primary driver of setting up the opportunity to understand what are the community needs? What do people want to see? And how do they want to bring that forward? I think this is part of what links to some of the other talks that you've already had within this series. But how do you begin to establish that, and how do you begin to build that? And most importantly of all, how do you begin to communicate it back? These values and visions, we've heard you about what your needs and what your interests are, and these are the ways that we can begin to see them translating into other ways. And so as part of this, one of the things that I want to talk about is the Cheonggye. And the Cheonggye is a river in Seoul, Republic of Korea, South Korea, that is more than a regeneration project. It's actually a recreation project. And so the Cheonggye, Cheonggyecheong, so it's the Cheonggye stream, is approximately 7 miles long. It's a massive recreation. It historically, for 800 years in early Seoul's history, was the river that divided the administrative city from the residential city. And it was a really important marker within the city because as you moved up through different social hierarchies, you had the potential to cross the river. And crossing the river on these bridges that we'll talk about in a moment was a really important character. Then during Japanese occupation in the last century, the Japanese came in, took the river, put it into a pipe, and then built a freeway over the top of it. In about 2000 or so, the city and the national government got together and identified the Cheonggye through a design competition as a project that they really wanted to invest in to reestablish their commitment to the city and to their communities and to the history, and as a way to inspire Koreans to be proud of their history. During occupation, there were, I'm not necessarily qualified to speak deeply about it, but there were a lot of concerns during occupation of kind of a lack of nationalism, basically. And so this was a project that brought on a great amount of opportunity for building back more national level care and interest and investment from the people. And so their vision was really to do this through deep cultural integration, but also through, obviously, an ecological lens and ecological perspective. One of the things that's important to note, and I'll come back to this in just a little bit, is to see the scale of it. So you can see the highway in the upper cross section, and in the lower cross section, you can see how it dropped down off of the main street and really kind of widened in its scope and perspective. The stream was built for a variety of reasons, obviously public access, and different components of it were really important around wildlife and ecology and water, but it's also built to hold stormwater. So during typhoons and flood events, this channel will fill up to the top and has actually breached the top at this point. And so it's also built to help funnel this stormwater out of the city during typhoons. Here's a little bit of an image of the 7 mile long course that you can see going through. In the upper part is the upper left. The design, it's split into roughly 7 different segments, about a mile long each. The design in the upper part in the central business district area, which would actually be off the screen to the far left, is much harder forms, still sinuous, but it uses concrete. And then those forms begin to break down over time. You can see in the right picture, it's a little bit hard to see, but you can see in the right picture one of the pieces that they left was, that's one of the stanchions for the freeway that they left behind as part of a reminder of the work that was going through. And there's great benefits. One of the environmental benefits that I think is really important is the benefits of the urban heat island effect. Within the channel is anywhere from 3 to 6 degrees cooler, 3 to 6 degrees Celsius cooler than the surrounding roads up above. That's for a whole variety of reasons. It doesn't have pavement, doesn't reflect the same amount of heat. It has the vegetation, it has the cooling effect of the water, and what I find is most interesting is they've basically created a tunnel within the city that draws the air off of the main Han River to which it ultimately flows. And so it brings a breeze up into the city, which is really an interesting feat of engineering that I don't think anybody really anticipated as they did this. This is an example. They also rebuilt the bridges because, again, the bridges were such an important part of interaction, communication, and advancement. And so they were the bridges became this this really kind of particular monument for reestablishing the creek. Not only does it allow people to cross, it also allows people to go down. And so this project's a fantastic project, but it also is touted as a major sustainability project, which I find is a bit false in the sense that as the designers and planners were getting into this and they had it all figured out, they started to dig down and looking for the creek. And by the time that they did that, the infrastructure underneath the roadways was so diverse and so complex, and the water had been distributed in so many different ways, the actual water for the creek was gone. They couldn't find it. And so as they began to build the channel, they realized they didn't have a source of water. And so what they actually do is pump water from the Han River, which it ultimately dumps into later on, all the way up to the source of the river. And that becomes the base flow from that then feeds into, that is fed by groundwater and other sources, but also stormwater in other ways as well. What they've been able to do is to establish that it goes through a filtering process so that it's actually a very high water quality as part of it. Because in some of these images, as you'll see, there's a lot of interaction and engagement with the water. This has really become a social center for many people in Seoul, in the engagement on hot summer days, to be part of that water and be part of these features. As part of that. The other aspect that I think is really important from an ecological perspective, though, to bring forward is that the biodiversity increase, obviously from a freeway, which essentially has zero biodiversity, to this river system. But they've seen from 2005 until I think the last numbers I saw was 2018, was something like a 639% increase in biodiversity when you look across plants, fish, mammals, birds, and insects. And so a huge jump in the number, basically 0 to 639 is basically what you get. But the kind of a massive amount of engagement by these different species and opportunities to bring them back to the city so that in many ways part of the work that we do and part of the work that I teach ultimately is how do we get people interested in the world around them that goes beyond the urban nature or the urban aspects and into the more natural aspects of it. And so I love this picture that was taken here. You know, one of the pieces that I do need to bring up as well of this project that's you know so highly touted and it's actually near and dear to me. I had an opportunity to be part of the design team on this. Was that it when the highway was removed or when the highway was constructed, there were a whole series of markets that were built within underneath the highway infrastructure, and within that there were homes that were built. These weren't homes that had addresses, but it was a market that was alive and thriving. And then when they took it down, they had to evict those people that had been there by this time for 30 years, so 2 generations basically. of families had been there. And they focused on how were they going to move people to different places, and structures were built and identified and families were moved, but the character of that community was completely gone and lost in a very short period of time. And that's one of the pieces that is really hard with a lot of these different projects. If you're really focusing on, you have a vision, you have an understanding, how do you move towards that vision and get there? That's a really critical aspect of understanding everybody's needs through the process. So the next component that I want to talk about is collective impact, and I know I'm a little bit behind, so I'm going to move a little bit faster. But it's about translating these values and visions into the project, kind of what I was talking about. And how do you understand collective need and build potentials for impact that cross the community, that cross governance, that cross regional economics? And I always like to point out that within communities also are more than human communities. So what are the collective impacts all the way across? For this, we're going to turn to Shanghai, China, and look at Hutan Park in Shanghai, China, the Huanhua River, and I think I mispronounced that name. I'm not exactly sure how to do it, but this is a 14-hectare park adjacent to immediately adjacent to the river that draws water off of the river and through a wetland filtration system cleans that water before it goes back into the river. This has won, I think, every award out there that you can possibly win as parts of projects, and part of it is because of how it's communicated. I absolutely love this image on the left. Because it's really clear and concise. On the left side, where the water comes in, is dirty. On the right side, where the water comes out, is clean. And then you begin to see the kind of complexity in the processes of the design of how water is moved through this overall system until it's ultimately it's cleaned going out. And this is a great project in Shanghai. It's a wonderful project. It's designed by Kongjin Yu and his team out of Turnscape, who do a lot of projects in urban centers in China. Again, highly touted project, 14 hectares. It's not really on our urban waterfront. It was an old steel yard. It was the laydown for a steel yard that they redid. And I had the opportunity to go and visit this project a few years ago, and was really kind of struck by how remote it was. It took a long time to get there, basically. And Shanghai's a massive city, and so, but it was particularly in a warehouse. There weren't many people there. It wasn't really heavily used. And then the other thing that I noticed is that it really wasn't cared for. It was designed really well and it was understood really well, but it wasn't being maintained. There wasn't care behind it. And part of that, when I began to look at it a little bit deeper, is that this project was initiated by the city of Shanghai with almost no public input. And so the public didn't have any investment in it. They didn't have any desire to steward it because they weren't a part of creating it. And so while it's a tremendous project, while it's touted as a fantastic project that includes urban agriculture into this through different cells, and really bringing life back to the city and improving the water quality, there's some really kind of pieces of it that don't quite meet that collective impact component of it, right? And so here's another little bit more detailed image of what it looks like. I had a friend go back just a little while ago, and it's actually now there's chain link fence all around it, and so something's happened over the COVID period that's kind of blocked it out, but. And I'm not necessarily sure what's going on, but you can begin. I like this image because you can begin to see kind of the cells, and they use a bit of a monoculture, but different planting schemes at different parts of the cells because they're cleaning different parts of the water column as part of that. So next, we're going to move into planning horizons. For me, this is one of the most important. Planning horizons and adaptive success is really where I engage. Other partners of mine worked really closely in developing the values and visions. I'm really interested in understanding how do we get these processes going and how do we move them forward. And planning horizons for these types of projects, again, I'll say it one more time, they're very complex. So as part of these projects, you need to understand and identify what are some of the low-hanging fruits that you can move forward, what's the short-term planning that you can do, but what's the long-term planning, and what are those horizons that you can really reach for over the long term. And in many ways, in successful projects that we see, you're moving back and forth against those different planning horizons all of the time. But what's really important is establishing these clear measures of success in both the near and the long term. And so we'll turn here to Barangaroo Waterfront. This is in Sydney, Australia. This is a massive project, 33-hectare project along the Sydney waterfront. You can see the port facilities in the bottom image. It was the previous image. In 3 years, they redeveloped at least the phase 1, the Barangaroo Reserve. And Barangaroo is named for a very important Aboriginal woman during colonial times, named after, I should say. And part of what that project is in that upper piece that you can see is really interesting, is they were really invested and interested in reestablishing the historic shoreline of Sydney Harbor. And so it's a fairly accurate representation of that shoreline, which I think is a fascinating piece. But this project, in terms of planning horizons, was built, or is not completely built, but is designed in 3 different phases. The Barangaroo Reserve, which you can see on the left there, the Central, and the Barangaroo South. And the Central and the South are much more diverse. There's some open space incorporated in them, but they are essentially towers of commercial real estate, of residential real estate, and of office space as well. Deep private investment that's going into this. And so this project has been, each phase of it is designed to be sustainable as part of that. I just wanted to read, designed based on sustainable design principles. That is one of 17 of the developments for the Clinton Climate Initiative Development Program, which supports large-scale urban projects that reduce on-site CO2 emissions to 0. And so the focus is really understanding and exploring new and innovative technologies to not emit carbon during the process of both construction and operation, which is a huge feat to be sure. And you can begin to see some of the projects here and some of the edge here. That wall is the historic shoreline that you can see kind of in the middle of the image. To do that, a big part of this project, especially the initial phase of the project, was about embedding Aboriginal culture into the contemporary city, and whether that's appropriate or not has become a point of great contention. It's a call for embedding the Aboriginal culture not from the Aboriginal people, but from other Australians. And so there's some real tension there, and there's both tension and opportunity as part of it. And then within all of these types of big projects, rightfully so, there are many critics that come to us. You know, critics have called it contemptuous and shocking, a breach of public trust. And a big part of that breach is that the first phase was public investment. This headland, this park on the lower end here, is a public investment project. And so the public invested money for this park. And the other phases are about a public and private partnership. But the way that the deal is arranged is that the public gets very little out of the investment into these other phases. And so there's really a lot of concern around who's making the money and who's truly benefiting out of this. And there's a lot of, and this has gone national news within Australia, but there's really a lot of concern that the wealth is being really centralized into a few hands, and that the public is really missing out as part of that. That being said, this project is moving forward, and will be built will be finished within the next couple of years. And so finally we get to adaptive success, and this is part of the kind of ecological restoration. world that I come from, within adaptive success, no project's ever finished. Once construction's ended is when the project really begins, and that's a big part of what we talk about all of the time. And so here within planning horizons, being able to adapt to unforeseen changes is a critical element. And I'll return back to Seattle just to close us out a little bit, and to talk a little bit about the project within Seattle that I've gotten to know. The planning process within Seattle hired James Corner Field Operations as the primary designers for it, and they did an amazing job at public outreach and public understanding and came up with the goals and the vision that everybody was looking for. Creating a waterfront for all, embracing and celebrating Seattle's past, present, and future, improving access and mobility, creating a bold and adaptable plan over time, and develop consistent leadership from concept to construction and operations. So they really developed this vision, were able to communicate this vision and this understanding that they created these fantastic images that are, and it was also one of the first images that we saw as well, but these really evocative images that are both technical but also illustrative of the environments that they have or they foresee for the waterfronts and the great diversity that's going to be a part of that, of bringing a waterfront for all, meaning not just humans, but all communities within that. The planning was really great. It was a 5-year planning process. They produced 5 volumes of material, and this is 1 volume kind of width of material. Massive amount of work that went into this. Really good process. They knew exactly what they wanted to do, and then construction began, and it all fell apart. And part of why it all fell apart within this process, they had seawalls break down. They had boring machines, a boring machine named Big Bertha, this massive mole-looking thing that was boring a tunnel underneath to move the cars of the freeway underneath the ground, broke down in the middle of it, and it took 6 months to repair because they couldn't get the parts. Kind of cost overruns, labor strikes. We just got through a concrete strike that was holding things back. A global pandemic, right? All of these things are issues that some were foreseen, but many were not foreseen. And so really understanding how to adapt and how to build, how to conduct such a large and complex project is nerve-wracking. One of my former students, who's now one of the lead planners on this project, talks about how bald they've gotten over the course of the past 8 years working on this, and how much they've aged, and how much they've also learned through this approach, and that the work that they do and the engagement that they do, they still see as really effective and important because we are seeing headway. We are seeing headway within these projects. And these are just some images of what it looks like today, or in recent years. And I took this because I did want to show that the freeway's gone, the seawall has been rebuilt, the tunnel is open, the underlying infrastructure is there, and in many instances here, what's left is kind of those surface pieces, those pieces that help to create that vision, those steps along the way. And this project has had to adapt through so many different issues and concerns. And is it a perfect project? By no means is it a perfect project. I don't think there are perfect projects out there. But this is one that's really working through towards a strong completion of construction. One of the things that I think they've done well is they've established the community within it, and the stewardship of it will be strong, I believe. And it's going to be a very lively and interesting place to come and be. And so in some ways, in many ways, this waterfront project is a success. Like in many ways, all of these other waterfront projects are a success. And so understanding their complexity, understanding the issues that they bring forward, having patience. I think patience is such a key element to this. And then remembering these process dimensions for urban waterfront regeneration. I think it's a key component to all of that. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate your time. I apologize for going longer than I was asked to go, but I tend to do that. I'm happy to respond to any questions you may have. Yeah.
So how are hurricanes being factored into these developments?
Very good question. They need to be. They haven't been in the past. And they need to be. I think Hurricane Ian in Fort Myers is a prime example of what we're seeing today and what potentially we'll be seeing in the future as well. I think new development standards need to be understood. Building on barrier islands isn't necessarily a good approach, and I think we're beginning to learn that in really hard ways and understand that. And so as Fort Myers, for example, and other communities within Florida begin to rebuild and build back, I think there'll be a really hard look at some of the development plans and development processes that come through, because while Ian was a massive storm, it wasn't the biggest storm that they could have gotten. And so they're even, more than likely there's more in the future.
Okay, you beat me to my first question. With all the rising sea level issues and things like that. It was fascinating to see how in Seoul they were able to make this project into a, to work with typhoons and to work with that. Some of the issues that we have here is contamination, like especially the Kalamazoo River. What are some of the ways that, like obviously the things they're doing in China is a really nice test, but some of the other challenges and how they're working around contamination from 50, 70, 100 years from ago?
Yeah, I've just worked on a project in Tacoma, which is about 25 miles south of Seattle, Tacoma, Washington, and it's an old smelter plant, and its plume had essentially contaminated. I think it's a swath of almost 50 miles to the north, because that was the way that the general winds flowed. But the site itself that we were working on was the site of the old factory and the old smelter. And what they did is the slag that was produced, they just dumped into the sound that was adjacent to it. And so it's what created new land, basically. And so this project that we were working on, and just actually finished a case study a couple of weeks ago about, was really looking at this park and what were some of the environmental remediation pieces that they were doing. And as we got deeper and deeper into it, I was shocked at how poor the technology is for dealing with contamination. I mean, we have some basic understanding for how to cap and hold material in place. That seems like the kind of primary element and the primary approach that they're doing. Other approaches that are extremely expensive is to dig it out and ship it and haul it and move it to another place. Other experiments that a lot of people within my field do look into phytoremediation and bioremediation, and those do work and they are effective, but generally not at the scale of the projects that we're working on. The scale of the projects that we're working on and the contamination levels that we're working on are well beyond anything that kind of a biological remediation is, at this point at least, is going to be able to deal with. And so what I see over and over again is much more of a cap and control component to it, which then limits the type of development that can go on the top of it, so you don't break the cap. So I wish I had the perfect answer for you that is all going to be better, but right now we're in the middle of all of those struggles to try and figure out what are the best ways to not only design but to plan our way through this contamination process, and how do we think about these not only for our generation, not only for our children's generation, but for generations beyond that. When those caps begin to break, how do we respond to that?
Thanks for showing these examples. A lot of really wonderful examples here. And I think the case for support from a financial and environmental perspective are probably pretty clear when they envision these ideas. But I'm curious about social impact in terms of goals. Like early on, do they set goals for social impact? How do they measure that? And perhaps are there any, nice surprises that come out of it, kind of like the breeze that wasn't expected in Korea?
Yeah, social impacts are set all the time. And in fact, again, the group that I've been working with have established a series of kind of social impact indicators for waterfront redevelopments that we speak about and we've published about. But I think the biggest thing that comes to projects is the need for public accessibility. And accessibility for all, and how so many of these waterfronts have been separated from their cities, from their communities for such a long time. How do you actually bring people back to the waterfront? And how do you, whether it's in 100% of the waterfront or whether it's in a significant portion of the waterfront, all of those are kind of details depending on the context of the issues that you're working through. But a lot of the issues are alleviated through access. But access just isn't having a pathway along the water. There are a lot of other pieces to access as well. And so part of what a study that I was recently looking at that came out of my college from a colleague was looking at transportation access. How do you get people to the waterfront? And so not only are you looking at that waterfront edge, but that really transition of moving people through and moving people there. It's looking at the social demographics of the area, what the social demographics and economic demographics of the area. Who are the people that live in downtown now? How is this really a resource for them? And if the people that we're really hoping larger public to come here are coming from other places, how do they get here? How do we support them to get here? How do they? Many people we have a light rail system, we have a fantastic bus system, but no matter what you do, there's going to be a significant portion of people that drive there. And so how do you accommodate that, recognize that and accommodate that, and not kind of shun that out of the way? What are the educational programs that go along to it? We find that that's also a really critical element. Seattle is fortunate to have a big aquarium. It's front and center in this image. A big aquarium on its waterfront that is an educational feature that draws a lot of people to it. As part of this design, the new wall that was created is a habitat wall. It has all these different benches in it so that it holds different marine vegetation, but it also has different crevices and crenulations to allow for different species of mollusks to attach, which then attract the species that want to eat that then attracts the species that want to eat them. There's all sorts of habitat benches that are built into this as well. And so there are these features and these educational opportunities, but really being explicit and showing people what these things are has also been something that we find is a real draw to it. And then providing different entertainment options and values is a really critical element to it as well. There's a Ferris wheel on Seattle's waterfront. I'm not a huge fan of it myself. But many people like it and many people enjoy to go there. I don't think anybody in Seattle has really ridden on it. I think it's mostly the people that come through on the cruise ships. But it's great. I mean, it's a form of entertainment that's great. There are different ways and different forms of entertainment. You can touch the water, you can get to the water, you can climb over. When it's built and constructed, you'll be not students, but kids will be able to climb over all kinds of natural playground materials or beach materials, and there'll be exposure there as well. And so I think those are some of the critical elements around kind of social measures of success is how do you get people there? How do you provide them with knowledge about the space? And how do you support them with their recreational and commercial needs, I guess, as well?
This is a very general question, but whose input who has input gathered from them? Like who are you? Who are we when you say we? And how do citizens have input? Like, for example, the people who live along the water's edge, are they asked? You know, are there town forums? How do people have input into the decision making?
Yeah, each project's a little different, and I realize as you say that I've used we in a lot of different cases because in some instances my we is talking about the research group that I'm working with. In some instances, my we is me being part of a public community as well. Each project's a little bit different, and it really depends on how it moves forward. For Seattle, and I guess I can speak to Seattle, there's a very robust system of public outreach, which went everything from large-scale public meetings to design workshops where the design team would invite the public to come in to give ideas, and they would draw them up to see kind of what these ideas were, to online input, to mailers that went out to every resident in the city to provide input through an online survey. And so it was a really robust system that continued throughout the design process. And so there was a lot of initiation up front to generate ideas and generate interest within it. And then during each stage of refinement in the design process, they went back out to the public and said, hey, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going based on your feedback. What do you like about this and what do you don't? What are other things that you can need? But each project is really different. Like the Hutan Park project that I spoke about in Shanghai, I don't think there was a whole lot of public engagement at all in that process. It was much more between the city agency and the design team to figure out, okay, what do we need to make this work, basically, and here's the money to get it done. And so each project's a little bit different, but where here we go. The research group that I work with, define success is actually through that civic engagement and through that understanding of it, that if we're going to design a waterfront for the people, then it needs to be designed by the people. And how do you bring their voices to the forefront? Yeah.
So I've got two things. So I work in the insurance brokerage industry, and when you mentioned the boring company, I remember seeing a little article that's still going on. The machine broke down, and the Washington Supreme Court just last month said they couldn't sue their insurers to cover the breakdown of the machine.
Yeah.
And the second one is the city of Grand Rapids is doing a big project to redevelop their waterfront. And I've been hearing about this for over 10 years. I remember a couple of years ago that they found a endangered freshwater mollusk right downtown. And that kind of put the project back a little longer and a little bit longer. So what's the average time from planning to it's done and then you can start enjoying it for most of these projects? Because I know City of Grand Rapids, 10 years later.
10 years later. This is 25 years. The city of Seattle's 25 years right now. Hutan Park was 3 years. The Chongay River was 5 years. A lot of it depends on where the real impetus and the push is coming from. If it's coming kind of top-down government, it tends to, and depending on the location and whether, in the U.S. there would definitely be more restrictions along the way, but things move really quickly. And projects are developed in a really quick manner. I would say within the United States, so much depends on kind of those first stages of the vision and values. And one of the pieces that I didn't talk about is what we claim is land assembly. What's the public-private partnership? We had a little discussion about that today in Muskegon. What's the private, who owns what along the waterfront? And what are the priorities and the initiatives of the public land versus the private land? And how do you begin to negotiate that? That can take generations to move through. And it has stalled many a project over the years. And so I'd be uncomfortable in giving you an average, other than to say it's typically a really long time that these projects move forward. I have seen some smaller projects in recent years in Australia and New Zealand with a lot of public support, with a lot of governmental support, and with a real drive to move things forward, kind of like a 5 to 8 to 10 year time frame to move forward. But each one of them is different. So.
Well, thank you. I wrote down a ton of notes. So.
Good. Nice.
Yeah, it's interesting because Ken and I visited the city of Muskegon. They asked Ken to come because they're looking at their waterfront, and that's the part that's the unglamorous part, right, Ken? This negotiation between who owns specific pieces of land, and if it's private ownership that expects some return, then it gets very complicated very quickly, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. But again, some of the ways that you can really get through that are those steps of doing a really thorough process of community outreach and developing those values and visions for a given project. That goes such a long way. And then the other piece is that short-term versus long-term. If you have a project that's right there, you have the funding for it, you know that it'll get initiated, then move forward with it and get it in the process so people start to see things getting done. Because as soon as things start to get done and you did a really thorough process in the front end to get people behind those projects, then you see a lot more engagement and a lot of a greater push to move things forward. So. And that's, yep. Thank you all. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks you for being with us. Thanks to the Amy Van Anda Library staff. Thank you for hosting us so well, and KDL, our partners. We at the World Affairs Council have a couple of projects coming up. On the 28th of October, we are welcoming the Australian Consul General for this region of the Midwest, and we'll have a lunch with him on the 28th of October that you can register for and talk about Australian-U.S. relations. And I'll have to ask him about the park here again. I'll have to ask him about the city park, right? But worldmichigan.org, you'll find information on that. And then on November 16, we're involved in a venture called Chinatown Hall. And every year we have a conversation about China-U.S. relations. We get a live stream from New York from the U.S.-China Relations Committee, and then we have a talk back. And we're going to do that on November 16 this year at the Ford Presidential Museum. And the live stream guest will be former U.S. Ambassador John Huntsman, who was the only American who was been ambassador to Russia and China. So he'll be a great discussion starter, and we'll have that conversation. Again, worldmichigan.org for all of that information. Thanks for being with us tonight.